You have been hearing about prediabetes and diabetes as these two extremely pervasive health conditions that affect tens of millions of Americans every single year, yet many of us don't even know that we have it. And the first thing that you do when you go to the doctor and they finally see you have an elevated hemoglobin A1C or an elevated fasting glucose is they look to give you a metformin prescription. Maybe they give you insulin because you have full-blown type 2 diabetes. Maybe they give you an SGLT2 inhibitor. Maybe they even give you a GLP-1 if they're a little more forward thinking. But what do they rarely ever talk about? They rarely talk about something that affects these conditions far more than medications does. Literature has shown time and time again that these interventions improve blood sugar handling and insulin resistance far more than medication. What am I talking about? I'm talking about lifestyle interventions. I'm talking about sleep, stress, resistance training, aerobic endurance training, and anaerobic high intensity interval training. I'm talking about lifestyle. Lifestyle improvements have been shown to be able to reverse type 2 diabetes and reverse prediabetes at rates far greater than medication can alone. And so in today's video, we're not going to be putting the cart before the horse. We're going to be talking about all of the lifestyle interventions that you can do to insulin sensitivity max. In next videos, we'll be talking about other pharmacological interventions, and then even kind of beyond that when it goes to hormones and peptides and kind of optimization methods that we can get into in future videos. But today we're talking about the fundamentals. So real quick, let's go over it. What is insulin resistance? Insulin resistance is essentially when the body needs more insulin to move the same amount of glucose into your cells. It usually develops gradually over time, and it can often happen years before any blood sugar markers are shown incorrect or shown as elevated, right? You might have a normal hemoglobin A1C, but you have developed insulin resistance. And so it's very important to start testing for this early, and you can reference the previous video about blood sugar testing. So let's now get into one of the first things that we need to focus on when making ourselves insulin sensitive. One of the most effective ways to improve insulin sensitivity is going to be through reducing excess adiposity, especially visceral fat. Visceral fat is going to sit around the organs in your gut. It's not going to be subcutaneous fat, which is found under your skin and in many cases healthy. Visceral fat is pro-inflammatory and does not respond to insulin in the same way that subcutaneous fat does. Visceral fat is metabolically very active, and it contributes to inflammatory signaling, lipotoxicity, and impaired insulin signaling. Weight loss improves hepatic and peripheral insulin sensitivity, meaning your liver and your skeletal muscle become far more sensitive when you start losing, especially that excess visceral fat. Now, once you've lost that visceral fat, or once you've lost adequate amount of fat, what is the other key element of body composition? Well, it's going to be muscle. Muscle acts as a metabolic sink. It's extremely hungry for glucose, and so it's going to allow your body to clear glucose much faster, at a much faster rate, and to a much greater extent than you otherwise would be able to. So if you have a large amount of muscle on your frame, you're able to take in more glucose and clear it in a healthy way. Versus if you have less muscle, that glucose, that same amount of glucose is going to be stuck in your bloodstream for a longer period of time, glycosylating all the surrounding tissues, causing a large amount of downstream deleterious consequences. And so body composition is not just losing fat, but it's also going to be improving the amount of muscle that you have on your frame. Now, how do we improve muscle mass? Well, of course, everybody knows that's going to be done through resistance training, particularly done with progressive overload. You can only build a very finite amount of muscle if you are not focusing on one of the core principles, which is progressive overload, meaning you need to be adding weight, reps, sets, however you're progressing in your workouts, you need to be doing more work. So resistance training is beneficial, and activity is beneficial for a variety of reasons. Resistance training is one of the most useful modalities when it comes to lifestyle interventions for improving insulin sensitivity because it acts through multiple mechanisms. A, it improves or builds that larger metabolic sink for more glucose to go into. But B, it also improves insulin independent GLUT4 signaling. And in my previous video, I talk about GLUT4, but essentially what GLUT4 is it's a receptor that sucks blood sugar out of the blood, the plasma. And when you eat a meal and blood sugar goes up, GLUT4 is brought to the surface of cells to evacuate that blood sugar out of the plasma through insulin dependent signaling, meaning insulin can signal GLUT4 to come to the surface of that cell. But what else can cause GLUT4 to come to the surface of the cell to take the blood sugar out is going to be exercise. And that's going to be done through AMPK. AMPK is another messenger that is activated with muscular contraction. So as your muscles contract, AMPK drives GLUT4 to be taken to the surface of the cell, to suck up more sugar from the bloodstream to power those muscles. So resistance training hits insulin sensitivity through multiple mechanisms. Not only does it improve that sync, but it also clears blood sugar without the use or without needing insulin. Now that's all well and good. The gym bros can celebrate that resistance training is extremely important, but that does not mean that cardiovascular training, particularly your zone 2 cardio, is not also extremely important. Zone 2 cardio improves your mitochondrial efficiency, metabolic flexibility, and fatty acid oxidation. So it's going to require less carbohydrates to function, right? If your body is able to use fat for fuel better, you're not going to be relying on glucose as much, meaning you can take in less glucose. You can eat less sugar and power your body. In people who have poor mitochondrial flexibility, inability to mobilize and oxidize fatty acids, you're going to be very reliant on carbohydrates, meaning you have to take in more glucose, more sugar in your daily diet. And this is obviously going to mean that your blood sugar, your insulin is going to be spiking, leading to insulin resistance. So while it's all well and good to go to the gym and make sure you have big muscles as a metabolic sink, do not be neglecting zone 2 cardio as a powerful tool to actually allow your body to not require this high octane fuel that is useful during exercise. But when you're sitting around, when you're lounging, many of us have relatively sedentary lives, you're not going to be requiring a ton of carbohydrates. So this is where zone 2 cardio is extremely important. Now, high intensity interval training is something that I recommend, yet it's not quite as important as the first two, but it is a very powerful intervention and can provide really powerful insulin sensitivity benefits within a much shorter time frame than simple zone 2 cardio. What it does is it's essentially like a hybrid where it's going to improve glucose transport, mitochondrial adaptation, and your cardiorespiratory fitness all at once. So while it's useful for some people, I would not really recommend it in beginners or deconditioned patients or highly stressed individuals, but it is good for effective, time-efficient training for those who want to remain insulin sensitive. If you're more advanced and you have a very busy schedule, and this is a method of training that you're used to doing, high-intensity interval training is a way that can keep you metabolically really healthy, give you all of the benefits of all of the things that I spoke about, resistance training as well as zone 2, in a much more condensed time frame. Now, one of the things that I really recommend in your daily life and to get used to doing is going to be walking after your meals. It's one of the simplest, most evidence-backed interventions that you can do to lower blood sugar right after your meal when it's going to be the highest. And even a short 10 to 20 minute post-meal walk can improve your postprandial blood glucose concentrations significantly. And this is, again, going to be done through that AMP-dependent GLUT4 translocation. So after you eat, insulin's going to signal GLUT4, but what else will you have? You'll have AMP signaling GLUT4 as well. So you'll need less insulin to get the same amount of GLUT4 translocation. Now, moving on to nutrition. There's a common phrase, a common adage, you cannot out-train a bad diet, and this is extremely true. Most of us will never be able to do enough cardio or enough resistance training to tolerate or manage a horrible diet full of processed junk. But what do we need to prioritize in an insulin-sensitive optimization diet? It's going to be high protein, high fat, high fiber, low glycemic index carbohydrates, and low amounts of processed foods. Right? So the ketogenic diet in many cases is actually used therapeutically to reverse diabetes and prediabetes, as you take in so few carbohydrates that your body becomes extremely sensitive to insulin, right? Your body releases very little insulin in response to proteins and fats, even though it still does. Carbohydrates release far more insulin than proteins and fats do. So the ketogenic diet is used in many cases therapeutically, and while I wouldn't recommend the ketogenic diet for many people, I think the ketogenic diet could be very beneficial for periods of time. I think stressing your body, allowing your body to adapt to different kind of stimulus and be metabolically flexible is an extremely important skill, and is a sign of a healthy individual if you're able to go from fat utilization and ketone production back to carbohydrates. So a low carbohydrate diet is going to be something that I would prescribe for the vast majority of people, unless you are somebody who trains regularly. And then next, I would move your carbohydrates to peri-workout. So if you like to work out in the mornings, I would recommend taking some carbohydrates in before and after training, and then really having a low carbohydrate diet for the rest of the day. You don't need carbohydrates in that way. Not every single meal has to be built off of the old school food pyramid, which has been shown to be flawed in many different ways. And we're not going to get into this during this video, otherwise we would make this video a lot longer. But you don't need to base all of your meals around carbohydrates. If you base all of your remaining meals, your non-peri-workout meals, around these core fundamentals of eating as much protein as you want and as much vegetables or as much fiber and leafy green vegetables as you want, you will remain insulin sensitive, and you don't need to focus and bother tracking meticulously your calories. That is going to be for somebody who is trying to get competition ready. I am a firm believer that in order to be healthy, you do not need to track your foods. You just need to abide by principles that work, right? Principles that are fundamentally sound. Now, after nutrition, we need to focus on sleep. Studies have shown that even short-term sleep restriction, even one night of bad sleep, impairs insulin sensitivity and glucose tolerance, right? One night of bad sleep harms your body's ability or makes your body worse at handling a load of glucose. Let that sink in. So for those of you who are chronically sleep deprived, getting less than 7 hours of sleep on a regular basis, you are harming yourself metabolically. This is having real life, long-term consequences, and you're not gonna see it while you're 20, while you're 30, while you're 40, or even 50. This is gonna be something, prediabetes and metabolic inflexibility and metabolic dysregulation is something that affects you far down the line and gives you a horrible quality of life when you're much older. And so you're not necessarily doing yourself any favors, right, by focusing on sleep and not going out and partying that night, right, or focusing on sleep and not staying up and watching Netflix, or maybe you even have to cut back on the work that you're doing and you might not get a promotion. You're not helping yourself in these different areas of life, socially or professionally. You might have to make some sacrifices, but what you are doing is you're setting yourself up to live a more sustainable life. Now, going down the same vein, stress and cortisol are going to be causally linked to elevated insulin resistance. So it's going to be very important that you try to reduce these in the ways that you're able to. So identifying stress points in your life is going to be really key to improving metabolic health. And again, this might be bad for your professional or social life, but we're focusing on building a sustainable one. Finally, modulating the amount of alcohol that you drink, or really managing the amount of alcohol that you drink on a daily or weekly basis, is going to be extremely important for metabolic health and insulin sensitivity, as alcohol affects essentially all of these different domains: stress, sleep, appetite regulation. You'll binge and eat excess calories. So modulating and really trying to cut down on the amount of alcohol that you drink, if it is I would say more than twice a week. Finally, here's my practical weekly plan that all of you can follow to make sure that you are optimizing yourself from a lifestyle perspective to keep your body as insulin sensitive as possible and prevent yourself from going down the rabbit hole of prediabetes and diabetes. Well, what we can do, we can resistance train 3 to 4 times a week, do 2 zone 2 cardio sessions or aerobic sessions every week, 1 optional high intensity interval session or high intensity interval training session a week if appropriate, walk 10 to 20 minutes after meals, protein forward meals with a high fiber